It's August 20, Ukraine Media Center continues its operation. My name is Svetlana Shiporenko, and now we are about to have a presentation of two reports: the documented war crimes in Chernihiv region and cluster munition attacks on Chernihiv. Let me introduce the speakers. Our discussion will be made up of two parts. So joining us now are Serhii Burov, Executive Director of Educational Human Rights House in Chernihiv; Anastasiia Khaliulova, Project Manager, Education Human Rights House in Chernihiv; Anastasiia Chupis, International Law Expert, Analyst; and Tymur Korotkyi, Head of the Foundation of the Support of Fundamental Research. Good afternoon, Mr. Serhii. I'm kindly asking you to tell us a little bit more about the project that we are about to discuss. What were the goals that you set for yourself in preparation of those reports, and where you've been able to achieve them? Well, first of all, I would like to thank everyone who got interested in our work today. Today we are going to present two reports that were introduced, and that's a result of a long-standing work that was started by our organization back in the beginning of the full-scale invasion. We started documenting war crimes. We started doing it in Chernihiv region because the organization itself was located in Chernihiv regions. That's why we've undertaken the coverage, undertaking the responsibility to cover the events unfolding in this territory, and we document the war crimes that we come across in the Chernihiv region villages, either those that were occupied or where the combat operations were going on. And another report is about the cluster munition attacks on the city of Chernihiv itself. This is the third report of ours that we put together from the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Our goal is to gather as much facts as possible that may evidence the war crimes. We don't do the investigations by ourselves. We only collect evidences that we hope, and we don't only hope, we already have certain examples of cooperation when our data was used by national law enforcement agencies and international criminal justice agencies. Also, we work with a number of organizations that deal with sanctions, those that deal with universal jurisdiction. I mean, those who can initiate investigations of crimes committed in Ukraine in their national jurisdictions. And there are two goals that we pursue with our documentation of war crimes. First of all, we want to make sure that the justice is inevitable, because any peace processes will result in sustainable peace only in case the punishment is inevitable for the perpetrators. And also, we want to preserve the truth about the war. So sometimes when you work with something like that, you start thinking whether the data that we collect will be really used and useful, and we're confident that they will be used, that it's necessary, and it will help in pursuit of those two goals. Well, I've already mentioned the methodology of our study. We mostly orient at Chernihiv region. Also, it's worth mentioning that on top of Chernihiv region, we also have a different focus that we are not going to discuss today, but it's also important. You may be able to find out more information in our web pages. We also document the crimes related to the attacks on educational institutions, schools, and universities. And in this case, we don't only cover Chernihiv region, but also Sumy and Kherson, and we will continue working with this topic further on. We use methods and techniques of information collection that are available for us. We work with open sources, we work with OSINT technologies, and we pay a lot of attention to the field missions, communication with the real people. And one of our principles is to verify information using a number of different sources. That's the essential information about our methodology. You will be able to read more in the reports themselves, and I would like to give more space to my colleagues who were putting their reports together. And also I would like to, as I pass the floor to my colleagues, to the authors of the reports, our colleagues in Ukraine 5 AM Coalition, the Regional Center for Human Rights, the Foundation for the Support of Fundamental Research. It's not the first time that we cooperate in preparation of the reports. Also, I would like to thank the team who was working on the project, the volunteers who joined us in our field missions, and also a lot of thanks to the people who provide us with evidences, because we perceive the people, the heads of the communities, the witnesses, the victims, as the partners who manifest their civil activity in such way, because no matter if we want it or not, no matter how careful we are in our conversations, our interviews, people continue re-experiencing the trauma. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Serhii. Well, there's a lot on the shoulders of the civil organizations now, a lot of work, a lot of responsibility. They are on the cutting edge of documenting the war crimes, and it's really important. I really want to thank everybody for joining this project. Ms. Anastasiia, before proceeding directly to the first report, can you please tell us about the key results and key figures of the project?
Thank you very much. I will tell about the project a little bit. About particularly the numbers. This project, we traveled around 11 settlements. It's more than 40 settlements during the whole period of our investigation, so to speak, collection of evidences. Also, during this project, there was more than 70 evidences collected from the people who confirm, and we are going to confirm this information further in, and this will be evidence that we are working with the International Court and International Criminal Court, and we will be making sure that the perpetrators are punished, and our team is consisted of the specialists who are specializing in OSINT intelligence, collection of free data, free access data, and also further passage of this information. When this happens, you understand the importance of your work, and this information was provided to the domestic institutions, international institutions, and this information is being collected, and archived, and it will be used further. It can be used further as documents, as evidence of the crimes that happened on the territory of Chernihiv oblast. So my colleagues will tell more about this. Thank you, and I would like to emphasize, if you don't have the report yet, in a printed version, in the back there are some. You can take them. Sir Tymur, what can you tell Miss Anastasiia, we will give the word to you. Thank you very much. As my colleagues said, it's a third report, and it's mostly the intelligence collected from the Chernihiv oblast, and I would like to thank my colleagues who conducted a very responsible work and combined all these important evidence together, and this is indeed very emotional and sensitive, this information, and to work with it is hard, and I would like to also retrospectively make an overview since 2024 until the June 2025, it was 11 visits to different settlements, and we have 11 sub-paragraphs in the report that describe each visit to each of those settlements, and in each of those sub-paragraphs we are providing, so to speak, like a historical reference about the settlement itself, its administrative organization. The next step is providing the information about directly the combat activities that happened in or around the settlements or affected it in any way. And these cases in those 11 settlements, they were different. It differed in attitude towards civilians. It differed in brutality. If in some cases, for example, there was apparently an order to not contact with the local population at all. However, in other settlements, there were indeed very tragic events, and we have a lot of cases that demanded judicial law qualification. And like if, for example, in Novobasansk, Stry, Bykiv, they met the occupation on the 24th of February. These were the first days of the full-scale invasion, and we have fixated in those places the evidences of those combat activities. The last settlement we visited, it was Lukashivka, around which there was a lot of active combat activities. A lot of military personnel from our side died. And the consequences of those combat activities did not let us go further into the Chernihiv region, and until the September of 22 and until April 23. Basically, this was this territory was occupied, and on the 6th April 2022. That's when the Ukrainian forces left the area. And it needs to be said that during those times that these regions were occupied, the occupiers destroyed water towers, food shops. They destroyed the food production facilities. So the locals remained without food supplies. Also, the medical facilities were robbed and destroyed. And some of the village, in some of the settlements, people were dying without necessary medical supplies, and their occupiers did not let those people get out of those places. My colleague Tymur will tell more about these cases. Sir Tymur, please. Thank you. I will start with some general questions that are connected to the activities of the documentation of military crimes. This activity is the documentation of the military crimes that are connected with the aggression were committed beginning the 2014. So from the legal point of view, the responsibility for certain individuals from the enemy camp is not the only things that are conducted during our activities. The first and foremost, in my opinion, is the provision of justice for the victims of the war crimes, and also preservation of the memory of the war events for the further for the future. So the fact itself of the monitoring visits, the immediate, the conversation, the communication with immediate witnesses of the crimes is already a very important fact, which leads us to the justice. And it's not abstract facts, it's not abstract documents, it's concrete people, it's concrete crimes. However, I will focus on the legal side of our report. First of all, I would like to emphasize that it is very important to document the situation and events related to the war crimes in the Chernihiv region is very important for the humanitarian organizations, I will be talking about the Chernihiv region and the results of our activity. More than 100 settlements are still under occupation, and this number kind of impressed me. And this led me to believe that our further steps need to be focused on further investigation of the systemic nature of the Russian Federation war crimes on the territory of Ukraine. Also, I see the need to further push the responsibility for the war crimes on the Russian side, because and also introduction of group responsibility for those who committed war crimes, and as for the concrete investigation, for example, in particular, for some of the commanders of the Russian army that committed war crimes on the territory of Chernihiv region. Also, certain military units of the Russian Federation could be pushed further to the responsibility for the crimes that they committed on the territory of Ukraine, and also in terms of preparation of the document of the preparation of the first report, we were focusing on the war crimes not only based on the Rome statute, but also the articles of the domestic legislation as well as international legislation. Third, systemic and complex analysis allowed us to determine certain patterns of the reports from the Russian side that we already know well from the reports regarding other regions. However, I have noticed that some of the crimes that systemic crimes that were committed on the territory of Chernihiv show that they were prepared in before. And also, it is necessary to mention about the tortures that were applied to the captured personnel in each of the settlements. These cases were fixated in each of the settlements, and Miss Anastasiia will tell further. And I would like to note that this is not a complete list of the crimes committed by the military personnel of the Russian Federation. This is also use of human shields and torture of civilians too. Miss Anastasiia, I would like to separate a few resonating cases. You can see on the TV. Our colleagues not only communicated with the local population, but also documented, made photos, videos right after the occupation. However, you don't see the pictures of the people who were killed by the military personnel of the Russian Federation. In majority, it was deliberate shootings of civilian people, like for example in Bykov settlement there were 3 people shot in the torture chamber of the Viktoriia settlement that the Russian Federation brought the people from other settlements too. We know that there were people from Peremoga village, there were people who were visiting relatives and they were detained, they were tortured. So we can say that the torture chambers, there was at least one in each of the settlements, and according to the evidence provided by the witnesses, there were representatives of the FSB or GRU special force, which are the special secret services of the Russian Federation. And right before retracting their troops, it is known from those evidences that there were 2 brothers killed from one family. There were 2 men and 2 neighbors who were basically taken from different parts of the village and brought to a certain place in the village and just were shot. However, it was the relatives of those people were informed that they will be back in a few days. It also was surprising for me that Russian military personnel had certain tactics, because we see these patterns when we work in different settlements. For example, in Basana, where the occupation started on the 27th of the February, the column of the Russian military were passing by, and the people from Viktoriia who were documenting the number of vehicles that passed by. So when they passed the village, the military from the Russian military detained a lot of different civilians for documenting their passage. However, it needs to be mentioned that these detainments, they were chaotic. They were not systematic. And as a result of these activities, a underage boy has died, and you can see destruction that was happening, the deliberate tactics is obvious from these pictures. So in some settlements there were no victims, direct victims of occupation. However, there were consequences of some incendiary shelling of the buildings in the village, and as a result, in one of the village, we have recorded more than a dozen buildings burnt down, and also people dying from not having access to the necessary medical treatment or lack of water. This is one of those types of crimes, war crimes that were committed by the Russian Federation on the territory of the settlements. As was said previously, the human shields indeed were used, and we know for sure that in some of the cases they were saying that they're gonna just park vehicles around here, and the information that they were given to the locals is that even if some destruction happens, you will be compensated. So they brought the vehicles inside the courtyards of medical treatments or living buildings, and this way they were trying to avoid the fire from Ukrainian armed forces.
Well, if I'm allowed, let me continue with this topic of the systemic nature and complex nature of documenting. And it's not only about the field missions, it's also about the use of the documented war crimes results. Currently we have 3 reports, and obviously every single one of them is systematized, and it contains an analysis of these or those events in violation of international humanitarian law. And the next phase is the unification, the integration of those 3 reports to identify the patterns when it comes to criminal behavior of Russian military. Also, in my opinion, it's worth scaling up this experience of complex documenting of war crimes to other regions. Also, probably it's important in specific cases to set up an investigation. Serhii mentioned that our methodology didn't contemplate any investigations, but now we have all of the information structured, so probably it's necessary to segregate specific cases to initiate investigations. Also, in my opinion, what's important is to continue the monitoring visits, but with a different purpose, with a different goal. In my opinion, such goal may be sharing of information on compensation mechanisms when it comes to the damage inflicted on the communities, and also about registration of such destruction in the register of losses and damage, and also to share information about this report, to have it presented at the level of the communities. It's about the preservation of the memory of the war and memorialization of those who laid their lives in that war. Also, it's legal to preserve the results of the documented, and in this aspect it's important to work with the state archive institutions, because as we talk about documenting of war crimes and bringing perpetrators to liability, it's for years, and it's about sustainable preservation of the evidences on one hand, but on the flip side is the preservation of the memory about the war. That is the responsibility of the State Archive. Thank you, dear guests, dear colleagues. In case you have any questions to our speakers, please raise your hands, take the microphone. And now that there are no questions on the floor, we want to thank Ms. Tymur, Ms. Anastasiia, and Mr. Serhii. And we're inviting Viktoriia Hlamazda, the documenter of war crimes, and Kseniia Korniienko, an expert in international humanitarian law, a lawyer and expert at the Regional Center for Human Rights. Viktoriia and Kseniia are going to present second report that covers one of the most dangerous types of munitions that are used by the enemy, the cluster munitions. And now we are going to hear about the use of cluster munitions in Chernihiv and Chernihiv regions. So the floor is yours. Can you please tell us about those facts that you were, information about which you were able to collect in Chernihiv region? Thank you very much for this opportunity to tell about the events that were unfolding in Chernihiv and Chernihiv region during occupation and during the strikes on Chernihiv using cluster munitions. Well, the report was made by me, Anastasiia, Kseniia Korniienko, Anastasiia Khaliulova, also Galina Kalinina, who is present in this room. I was working on my part together with the Analyst, whose personality is not public. His nickname is Kostas Klavius, and also other cases of shellings were covered by Dmitro Dzhima. Also, I would like to thank the Vidrozhina International Foundation for support of this study, of this report, and Truth Hounds, who provided us with the materials for our internal investigation. And I would like to start with the shelling that has taken place on the 17th of March. That's one of the bloodiest days by now in Chernihiv, and that's one and the only officially verified shelling during which the cluster munitions were used. There are different time frames, different witnesses were mentioned, from 9 o'clock until 10 o'clock in the morning, but the most probable time of the shelling was between 9:30 and 9:45 in the morning. Also, different time frames. It may be related to the fact that the shelling was performed from different directions, and the victims were killed during different time periods. So as a result of the cluster munition shelling, 22 people have died and 33 more were wounded, including 3 children. However, that's not the exhaustive list of the victims and casualties, because not everyone was able to get registered as a victim or casualty of cluster munition shelling. That's the information from the representatives of the law enforcement, because the numbers provided by the medics are larger. Well, the shelling was targeting the center of the city of Chernihiv. You can see this rectangle on the map, 600 by 500 meters, in which a lot of medical infrastructure is concentrated, along with the residential buildings, points of sales, and no military. The only military installation in that district was a military block post with only a couple of military, but comparing to the number of civilian population, that could in no way be a legal military target. After the shelling, the medics were provided first medical aid in very difficult conditions, because after the shelling, the lights immediately go off, along with the water and heat supply. And the hospitals located in that area also lose all of those utility services. You can see one of the surgery rooms in this picture. They were providing first medical aid right in that room without heat, without water, and without lights. It was cold. It was winter, well, basically the month of March, but still cold. The victims, well, the casualties coming to the hospitals back then, they had wounded lower limbs, like fragmentation wounds, almost all of them. Just imagine a cluster munition exploding, and the area they hit are the lower limbs of the people, and all those people need immediate medical interventions, or otherwise they would die. They were just bleeding to death. Some of them just lost a lot of blood and died right there. There were no conditions in which those people could be saved. Just a little bit of information about the medical institutions that were damaged. For example, Chernihiv Regional Children's Hospital, just for understanding, as a result of the cluster shelling, 322 windows were damaged, along with the radiators, roof, cracked wall, transfusion department, morgue, etc. also ended up under strike, where TB Hospital, Chernihiv Blood Center, and a couple of other hospitals, including Women's Hospital number 1, Municipal Hospital number 1. And in those pictures, we can see how the shelling was targeting the children's hospital specifically. That was almost the front entrance, the main entrance, and the missiles were hitting the ground right by the central entrance. Also, on the other side of the hospital, there were two missile bodies found empty of cluster munitions. So basically, specifically in those areas near the windows, there are hits that could only happen if the missile was coming from the west or southwest. So we started investigating those directions, and we came to the conclusion that the most probable axis of shelling was not a sole one, and that may be an explanation why the casualties mentioned different types of shellings. So that was a moment, the schematic moment of explosion. You can see the arrows. The explosion could have happened right above the blood center. And those cluster munitions could fly in all those directions, and the missile itself hit the garage. This is the picture that we found online. And during our field investigation, we found the necessary garage, and we were able to find out that the missile was coming from the west, and it may have caused that damage that we've depicted near the front entrance to the blood center. Another area of investigation is Pivdenia. It was studied by our colleagues from Truth Hounds. They were able to document the strike of a cluster munition in Chernobyl Street. You can see a missile entering the ground at the degree of about 76 degrees, and its bottom part was pointing to the south. That means that the shelling was conducted somewhere from the southern regions, southern parts of Chernihiv region, like Ivanivka, Lukashivka. We were unable to identify the specific spot. Also, we were able to study 2 cluster munitions. The one that was coming from the southern direction, it was also investigated by the law enforcement agencies. So it's more or less of an official version about western or southwestern direction. That was a conclusion made by Education House Chernihiv. And we may say that there were way more cluster munitions in Chernihiv alone, in this district alone that is depicted on the map. This is the perimeter, 500 by 600 meters. From the open sources, we were able to identify that there were at least 7 missiles. We were able to geolocate 6 of them. And another one exploded somewhere above the blood center, but the direct spot where it hit is still unknown. Also, we've identified more than 20 places of submunitions explosions. And that's basically it about the events that unfolded on the 17th of March. But also we were able to identify that the missile that on the 17th of March hit Chernihiv was called 9M72K, and it contained a submunition called 9H210. How did we find it out? We found it out by the fragments that were found in the bodies of the victims. They are inherent in those munitions that are only launched by the multiple launch rocket system Uragan. And it's a 99% probability that it was specifically this kind of a rocket artillery that was using that type of munitions. We were also able to identify the military units that were located in the area and that were using this type of MLRS. The separate artillery brigade 400, rocket artillery brigade 232, and artillery brigade 120. In our opinion, the most probable perpetrators were from the artillery brigade 232 because they were present in both southern and western areas of the region. Also, we were able to verify this information from the sources close to the armed forces of Ukraine and the special agencies. We were provided this information unofficially that yes, those units were located there during that period, and I personally saw certain materials that were describing the facts of identification of traces of launches by Uragan multiple launch rocket system.
This report also provides other cases of shelling with cluster munitions in other settlements of Chernihiv. There is no solid evidence, but there is oral evidence that we collected. For example, in Chernihiv, we have found this information to be very hard verifiable because there were no registered victims or complaints concretely about the Chernihiv region. Those were mostly public places, and people tried not to be there. And on the 17th of March, people were mostly underground in the shelters. Everybody tried to find a shelter. And now I would like to give a word to Anastasiia. She will tell more. I would like to tell you a little bit about what influence are the cluster munition shelling has on the population. Well, let's first remember that the cluster munitions have the most threats, pose the biggest threat towards the civil population, because it contains the explosive materials that are that consist a substantial threat not only for the buildings or structures, but also for the people. You can see in the report more information about what structures and how people suffered from the shelling during the March of the 22. However, if we are to talk about the concrete influence on the population, first of all, it's a great number of dead people, of people dying because of blood loss and persistent threat, which is hardly understandable by the common people, or especially by children who had no idea about these kinds of munitions in the February of the 2022. And this, of course, affects the psychological landscape of the population in Chernihiv region. And still to this day, they feel the psychological pressure and trauma inflicted on them. And this is a very big problem, because no matter how much psychological aid are provided to these people, it's not enough. Legal consultations is also one of the things that provided to the people there. However, the damage that was inflicted on the infrastructure and on the lives of the people was immense. And one of our tasks is not only documenting these crimes, but also providing this information to the international community, to bring this information to them in order to forbid these kinds of munitions. Ms. Anastasiia, so we were talking about that we want all those responsible for these crimes to be punished. So what is the situation from the legal point of view? Thank you very much. And I would like to first thank the educational home of the human rights of Chernihiv. I would like to say that I'm sure that the reports provided today, they will be the basis for both the domestic legislation and the international legislation. And let's get back to the March of 2022. This was one of the biggest attacks, and it is remembered by the immense damage inflicted on the civilian infrastructure, and also the one that happened with use of the cluster munitions, and also that evidences the war crimes committed on the territory of the Chernihiv region. And I will also stop a little bit on the context of the humanitarian law, international humanitarian law. I would like to say that the population that is living in Chernihiv. The first targets, the first victims, and the biggest category of the victims of the cluster munitions, as experience shows internationally, are the civilians, and this is why this kinds of munition is forbidden by the norms of the international law. And why this is so is because that cluster munitions do not explode immediately after they hit the target, and which poses a significant threat to the civilian population. Also, the Chernihiv case is the first case of the mass use of this cluster munition during this full-scale invasion of the Russian Federation against Ukraine. And also, the Chernihiv case shows us that it is a systemic and pre-elaborated tactics of the Russian Federation. And I will stop on this a little bit later. I would like to also say that according to the international humanitarian law, it does not imply a use of the cluster munitions. It is not forbidden as long as it is used against lawful military targets. However, it is forbidden in 2008 about its use against the civilian targets. So it is still has this little note that even if it is used, it needs to be used in accordance with the humanitarian law, international law. However, evidences show that the Russian Federation used the cluster munitions not only against military targets. Another moment, if the attack is committed against a target, it needs to be a target which corresponds by its category to the weapon that is used, the munitions that's used. So in this way, before an attack is committed, such attack has to be let known ahead of time to the other side in order to minimize the losses among the civil population, which was not done by the Russian Federation. As we all know, there was no caution or warning about the use of the cluster munitions. Also, a number of international laws was violated during this attack because the deliberate attack against civil infrastructure is forbidden with the use of the cluster munitions. Also, the characteristics of the attacks show that that this kind of crime can be categorized as a crime in accordance with the Rome Statute, and as it was mentioned before that there was a block post, a military block post in the Chernihiv. However, we cannot say that the Russians used this cluster munitions against this particular block post because it does not comply with the aforementioned law, which does not allow use of the cluster munitions for the unproportional attacks against military targets. What concerns civilian objects, in particular the blood center, the medical facilities, and the concentration of civilian population, and the Russian Federation knew for the fact that there were civilians there, these can be characterized as a deliberate attack against the civilian, as you can see, can be characterized as a deliberate attack against civilian target with the use of the cluster munitions. In regards with the systematic character of such attacks against Ukraine, we can say that these kinds of attacks consist of the terroristic act. And if they are characterized as a terrorist act, they cannot be characterized as a military war crime by the international law. However, we can say that there was a lot of damage inflicted against the health and well-being of the citizens of Chernihiv, and we can say, using the stated above, that the Russian Federation deliberately attacked the civilian population of Chernihiv. This is where it needs to be mentioned that both Ukraine and the Russian Federation are not a part of the agreement of non-use of the cluster munitions. However, there are some separate documents that were signed by the parties that limit the use of the cluster munitions. I would like also to say that regarding Ukraine, in the international community, we recommend to Ukraine, in the face of their competent government bodies, to initiate the investigations on the national level and to continue the cooperation with the international organizations, in particular in the case of utilization of the cluster munitions on the territory of Ukraine, and also to bring attention to the fact that the cluster munitions do not explode immediately after the strike, and which poses a significant threat against the local civilian population. And regarding the recommendations towards the international community, what needs to be done is to the reinforcement of the cooperation between the non-governmental organization of Ukraine, and also include the information that's gathered by the local Ukrainian organizations, to include them into the international documentation, and also increase pressure against the Russian Federation that were providing, that did not provide the information about the utilization of the cluster munitions beforehand, and also to apply for financement, to submit for a financement of the investigation of the areas that the utilization of cluster munition was registered. Also, we don't really recommend anything to the Russian Federation. However, our recommendation, if it would exist, we would recommend them to stop aggression against Ukraine, and to conduct a separate investigation regarding the use of the cluster munitions. That's why I think that our report could be taken as a basis for the governmental organizations in the investigation and the development of different programs of aid for the victims. Thank you for this detailed report. Maybe among our guests, somebody has any questions. Please. If there is no questions, I would like to thank you very much to our guests and to everybody involved in this report. This is really an up-to-scale work. And this is what I truly believe needs to be implemented on the international level, and especially in the case of those crimes that you listed today. Also, I would like to say that you have listened to the report about the use of the cluster munitions in the Chernihiv oblast, and the media center team is working on the next topic. Stay with us. Thank you very much.